So we've decided how we want to go. Where do we go? What market do we go in? And that's the next question. So basically, when we ask about market selection, it's asking us to go back and look at the basics of business strategy, the pestle analysis, the Porter-esque 5 forces analysis, and do that from an international perspective, basically looking at specific markets and saying, hey, is that an attractive market? Should I go there or not? Now, it's a little bit more. We'll start with the pestle analysis. We'll look at maybe specific conditions of the pestle analysis because we know they're very important for international strategies. For example, in the pestle analysis, we look at politics and regulations. Well, we know that politics plays a really big part of being an international player. There are a lot of risks. If you say, hey, I want to go and operate in a certain country that has maybe a lot of political risks. You go up and set up, and a lot of people at sometimes were very afraid to go and set up in China because they were afraid that the country would just seize their operations at one moment. Or there's a lot of benefits. You can go to one country and set up operations because they're offering you some tax benefits to set up operations. So there's risks and regulations that differ from one country to the next. A really good example of where to find this and measure it would be with the COFACE, or COFAS, the Compagnie Française d'Assurance pour le Commerce Extérieur. You can go to their website and find tons of really interesting information about country risks and country risk assessments if you're interested in going abroad. And they do a really good job at identifying these potential risks. Another part of the pestle analysis that's very specific when we go abroad is the economic part of the pestle analysis. Countries grow at different rates. Countries have different, it's investment markets and market conditions. Countries have different currency, and currencies have different risk. So if you're interested in going to a country, you may want to look at, is the economy growing? Is there a lot of wealth? Do people have a high tax burden? Is the investment market is it free? Can I quickly get money if I need to grow my capital? Is the currency of the country at a risk? Is it high volatility, etc.? So these are some of the other issues. Social activities, obviously, and social aspects are really important when going abroad. You want to look at the education levels that the country can offer you because you need to hire talented people. Do they offer the education systems to provide you with the talent you need? What about cultural differences, tastes, values? Remember, you're going abroad, you're becoming an international company, you may be managing people abroad. And not only are you selling products to customers with different tastes and different values, so your marketing may or may not work. In certain countries, you have to adapt it, but you're also managing people in these different countries, and you have to keep that in mind. The legal issues, obviously, laws vary from one country to the next. The contract laws, labor laws, all of these vary, and you really have to get your hands around these differences. Careful of what we'll call institutional voids. Sometimes you go into a country and you find, oh, well, look, there doesn't seem to be anything that regulates telecommunications, or we're lacking laws in certain areas of the organization. Oh, the labor laws are not very clear, and everybody kind of does what they want. These voids create uncertainties and risk. So try to identify not only what's there, but also try to identify what's not there. Also, when you consider the 5 forces assessment of Porter, we know that in the middle of the Porter model, we find rivalry, right? So market rivalry is one key element of the Porter model. So when you're assessing what market to go into, you want to assess how the national firms where you're going are going to respond. How are they going to defend? Will they defend their market? Hey, I'm going to go start selling my product in Italy. What are the Italian producers going to do? How are they going to act? So you need to get your hands around the rivalry and how those rivals may act in a coordinated fashion against an incoming foreign quote-unquote threat. So how will the local market players respond to the arrival of a foreign player? And lastly, we want to look at the fit to your culture and your the way you operate today. Sometimes we can sit and we can make all these ideas, and we can list off politics, economic, social, legal, whatever, and we can rank countries. Okay, let's go to that country because it ranks highest. Well, the highest rated or ranked country in terms of attractiveness may be less attractive if your current country is far from that country. Let me give you an idea. If I have a country, suppose I'm operating currently in France, and I do my assessment, and I've got two countries, that are highly rated, where I can go, highly ranked. I can go and set up operations in Taiwan, or I can go and set up operations in Spain. And they're about the same. Well, the reality is that the Spanish market and the Spanish way of working is probably closer to my reality than that of Taiwan. So even though maybe they're ranked the same level on these characteristics that I've listed, social, economic, political, etc., the proximity or the closeness to my reality is much higher with Spain. So I have to look at the relative fit to my country. And to do that, we've got a little tool called CAGE. So the CAGE framework allows us to assess what are the factors that fit or match with my current way of operating. The first is C, and that stands for cultural distance. So to what extent the cultural norms, the values, the languages, the religion, the management styles, right, and the attitudes towards internationalization are similar to what I'm used to. Am I going into a country where the way I work, our values, religions are a good match or not? And I'm not saying you can't go if they're not, but you have to be aware of the risks. The second one would be any administrative and political distance factors that may exist. Are the administrative systems similar in some way? Does my experience with administration work in that country? Are the legal systems the same? For example, countries that had previous colonial ties often have similar legal traditions, and that may be a plus. What about corruption? Is corruption a key part of political life for businesses? Do we see in certain countries, money going under the table to get things done? Is that the way I'm used to operating or not? What about political hostilities? And what about currency? Do we share the same currency? I use the euro in France. Well, I can go and they use the same in Spain. Great. But if I go off to Taiwan, well, it's a different type of currency. Third factor would be geographic distance. So geographic distance is obviously the physical distance, but also the geographic characteristics. Am I going from a big country, with a lot of shared borders to an island, a little small island? And what does that mean? When I take my understanding of markets and how they work and how to get things done from a large country with a lot of neighboring countries where we're all friends to maybe an island where there's no neighboring countries. Or, what if the neighbors of my target country are all enemies of that country? Also, can I easily access trade routes and shipping and transportation infrastructure? Hey, do I have it here? And am I used to working in a country where I can easily ship things from point A to point B? And what happens if I go to a country where shipping from point A to point B is a little bit more difficult? Am I ready for that? Okay. And lastly, economic distance. What are the economies like? Are the economies similar or not in terms of the cost of labor, in terms of the wealth, in terms of poverty levels? Again, not every country has to be like every country. I mean, they're all different. But the question is, you have to understand, into which country you're going to be going. To what extent it's different than what you've got where you are. And these are some of the factors that you can look at to measure that. One simple thing you can do, by the way, to understand culture is head over to HofstadtInsights.com, and they offer you a very simple way to compare cultures from one country to the next. So if you're looking at the cultural factor and cultural proximity, the Gert Hofstadt's HofstadtInsights.com site offers you a really simple, free tool to understand that. And the last thing we want to look at is market entry. So there are many ways to enter. We've gone through the drivers, we've gone through the advantages, we've chosen a strategy, we've chosen a target. Now we got to choose how we go, the market and the mode of entry. And a lot of factors enter into this very seemingly simple decision, but it's not. The question is how we start, right? So the first would be the amount of resources we have to commit. Are we ready to commit a lot? Do we need to commit a lot of resources? Can I go lightly? Can I enter in a way where I don't have to commit a lot of financial labor resources to succeed? Can I go step by step, or do I have to make a big commitment up front? That's a big question we want to ask. Second would be the level of control and operational involvement. Do I want to keep control of technology and quality? Do I want to keep control of marketing and sales? Well, this is going to determine how I enter. Risk, certain types of entry will be riskier than others, and certain types of entry are faster than others. Now, there are 4 basic modes of entry. I mean, there's probably a mix of these, but there's 4 types of entry that I can present to you. First is export, and this is linked to the simple export model. I'm going to go in. My first play, if you will, my first move will be to export. The second would be a licensing or franchising type of mode of entry. This is a contractual agreement to exploit a product, technology, or service concept for a fee. So you find a franchisee, you build a franchise in a foreign country, you find somebody that you can license your product to sell your product abroad. Great, you've contracted with them, they're going to sell your product for you, and this is a less heavy way of entry, obviously. And then we get a little bit more robust with a little bit more resource commitment. We can have a joint venture where I will jointly own a company with another company in the host country. So, hey, I want to expand into China. I find a partner in China that's ready to jointly own an activity with me. So we jointly own the assets of this joint venture. We jointly own the equity, and we build this partnership up between myself and the local Chinese company in a JV. And the JV operates in China, and we jointly own this activity, and that's how I'm going to enter. Now, in some countries, that's the only way to go. I mean, in China, for certain things, you can only go in with a JV. You need to have a local partner to make that happen. And the other way of entry is foreign direct investment or a wholly owned subsidiary, where I basically go in and say, you know what, I'm going to either acquire or build a company, and I'm going to control it 100%. This is what we call also a greenfield type of startup or operation. So what we're going to do is we're going to see all these independently, but you should also bear in mind that there's what's called a staged expansion model, and this is basically saying that you don't need to make this choice right from the start. You can grow your organization. You can start light, if you will, maybe with exporting or franchising or licensing, and move forward towards joint ventures and a greenfield type of operation as you build your knowledge and your capabilities. So the modes of entry, again, are different based on the level of resource commitments, the control we want, the risks offered, and the speed of entry. Exporting, obviously, right? Low resource commitments, a light mode of entry. We have total control of the technology and the control of quality. We're building the product locally. The marketing and sales, however, we don't necessarily control because we're giving our product to be sold by a local distributor, probably. And we're just sending it off and they're selling it. The risks of this model are relatively low, and we can do it pretty quickly. Okay, so it's pretty easy to export to a buyer that sells it at a local grocery store in a foreign country. So the benefits: no operational facilities needed in the host country. I just export my product. I can benefit from economies of scale locally. And internet technologies offer me a way to access some of these low-cost markets. The negative sides would be that I have no benefits from location. So maybe I could even get lower costs from, instead of producing a lot of my product here, I could produce some of my product there and maybe even get lower costs locally, but I'm not doing that. I'm dependent upon the intermediaries. I already mentioned that I may need to have a local distributor distribute my product to retailers or a host buyer. And I'm dependent upon them and what they do. I've got transport costs. I've got to get my product abroad, and that could be timely and expensive. And the reaction time. If there's changes in the marketplace and I need to adapt my product or adapt to what I'm doing, there's a lot of turnaround time involved. Our second model is the licensing and franchising model, and this is going to be pretty much the same as export, except for one small change here, and that would be with the technology and quality control. Because if I'm licensing or franchising, for example, production of my product in a foreign country, suddenly I don't have control. I can maybe try to control it at a distance, but because I've given the host country company control, the license to produce and sell a product, they're in charge of the tech and the quality as well. So I've lost a little bit of the control that I had. We're going to see about the same characteristics. The pluses here, I have a contractually agreed income. So if I license, for example, a product to be sold, I could actually get some revenue streams from that license, whether they sell or not. Now there's also the bad side is if they don't sell, I don't get any share of revenue, but I can contractually agree on some fixed revenue streams independent of sales. And the other benefits are that I have limited economic and financial exposure. I'm not going and setting up a whole plant and operation. I'm letting somebody else do it for me. The negatives, pretty obvious as well. It's hard to find somebody to do this, right, and agree on the contractual terms. It's easy to imitate. I can go and find somebody that licenses and franchises my product abroad, but there's going to be people that will copy it, and I can't really have. I'm going to have a hard time controlling that. And there's the benefits from the locational advantages of the host nation are going to be limited. I get maybe benefits from some of the franchising and licensing persons. There's going to be some benefits, but I won't get them all. Our third model, joint venture, now suddenly we start moving up, right? And so our resource commitment has grown substantially. Our tech and quality control is about where it was. Suddenly, medium marketing and sales control. So suddenly I'm gaining a little bit more control on the way my product is marketed. I have to commit more resources. I'm taking a little bit more risk. And it's going to take a little bit more time. So if I want to do a JV, I've got to find a partner. I've got to invest time. I've got to take a little bit more risk. So this is a little bit more mature model of entry. The pluses, well, I can share the risk with my partner. I'm not going it alone in a JV, and hopefully my partner has some good understanding of the local market. So we're combining complementary resources and knowledge. And as I mentioned, it may be a required mode of entry in some countries. The negatives, it can be really hard to find the right partner. You got to manage the relationship with a foreign partner. There's a potential loss of control of technologies to the partner. The partner may seize or somehow obtain control of some technologies. And don't underestimate the cost of coordination. Coordination can be very, very difficult in a JV. And lastly, we move into the wholly owned greenfield subsidiary or foreign direct investment, where you're investing tons of resources because you're building literally a company, production and all, abroad. You've got total control. You've got total marketing sales control. You have a high level of risk because you're investing a lot of resources. But it's the speed, I shouldn't say but, the speed is low. Okay, so it can take a long time to set up an entire operation in a foreign country. Benefits. Well, you've got total control. That's pretty obvious. You can integrate and coordinate your global activities. So if I've got operations in North America, operations in China, operations in Africa, operations in Europe, I can use those different facilities to create the best product at the lowest cost possible. So I can integrate and coordinate my activities across all these different units. I have potential state assistance and aid available to me. Sometimes countries offer significant benefits to foreign companies that invest directly in their country. So a lot of countries, and France is one of them, and the United States is one of them, they all have advantages, and they try to attract foreign investors to build their operations locally. And the negatives, well, it's an investment in the host country. It's a substantial investment that has to be made. You have to commit to that host country. I mean, if you go in, you start spending money on capital, you build your factory, and suddenly things start turning south, you're still in there. You gotta hang on even during the tough times. You just can't abandon when things get tough. If you do this through acquisition, if you say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to create a wholly owned subsidiary and I'm going to acquire a local company, then you have to deal with the challenges of acquisition. And we know that acquiring a company and building a common culture and creating cohesion and collaboration in an acquired company can be very, very, very tough. And the cost factor is really hard to predict. You're going in, you're starting up a company. It's like, starting from scratch, and it's really hard to predict all the costs you may encounter. And to finish things off, in terms of the model we presented here, there are some challenges to this model of entry mode overall. First is that there are what we call today born global companies. The entry is, hey, I start global right from the start. There's not a question of entry from my current country to a foreign country. I start globally. And this is when you can't wait for scale up, or you need the footprint to start at that high level. You need to have a global market penetration to be a player. Airbnb is a good example. Spotify is a good example. These companies, by their nature, are global, right? And if you don't start global, you could be quickly imitated by another company. Airbnb, by its nature, is providing services around the globe. These are born global companies, and this is something we're seeing more and more of today. And we also see the emerging country multinationals. And these are basically emerging countries, so emerging economies, that quickly go international before they can be copied. So this is a trend we see now in emerging economies, where a country will be started and they build their capabilities locally and then exploit them very quickly in international markets. And this is particular with emerging countries and the multinationals in these emerging countries. So these are some of the challenges to the mode of entries that I explained previously. So we've covered a lot of the basics of internationalization. If you have any questions about internationalization, if you have any questions about entry modes, the different models that we presented, don't hesitate to send me an email. I'll try to answer those questions as quickly as I can. Once again, thank you for listening. I'm sorry this was such a long video. There's a lot of material to cover, but I hope it was helpful for you, and it gives you an idea of what's going on when a company decides to go international. Thank you very much.